At Lumiere, Victoria Sterling, the billionaire CEO known for her ice-cold decisions, sat alone at her usual corner table. She never noticed the four men who walked through the door that Friday night. They weren't there for dinner. Their eyes locked onto her with unmistakable rage, and they moved with the kind of collective tension that preceded violence. In that moment, the quiet waiter, Darnell Brooks, a single father who'd kept his past buried for 3 years, had to make a choice. What he did next surprised everyone, including himself. The warm glow of chandeliers cast soft shadows across white tablecloths at Lumiere. Friday nights brought the usual crowd executives celebrating deals, couples dressed for anniversaries, voices kept low beneath the gentle drift of jazz piano. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of a glass tower downtown. Its floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city lights beginning to flicker on as evening settled in. Darnell Brooks moved between tables with the kind of quiet efficiency that made him nearly invisible. He'd worked the Friday dinner shift for 3 years now, 7 until 11, and he knew the rhythm by heart. Refill water glasses before they're half empty. Clear plates from the right. Smile politely, but don't linger. The job paid enough to cover rent and his daughter's school expenses, and it let him pick Lily up from her after-school program every afternoon before his shift started. He was 35, but looked older when he was tired. Broad shoulders that he kept slightly hunched, dark brown skin that caught the warm light of the chandeliers, close-cropped hair with tight curls that needed trimming, a beard he'd grown to look different from the clean-shaven officer he'd been years ago. Most customers never really looked at him. That suited him fine. Victoria Sterling arrived at exactly 8, same as always. Darnell watched her hand her coat to the hostess and make her way to table 12 in the far corner. She came twice a week, always alone, always in a dark suit that looked expensive, even from across the room. Her auburn hair was pulled back tight, and she carried herself like someone who'd learned not to waste energy on unnecessary movements. Darnell had served her maybe 20 times over the past year. She ordered efficiently, ate quickly, and left generous tips without making eye contact. He appreciated that she never tried to make conversation. Some customers seemed to think waiters existed for therapy sessions or flirting. Victoria Sterling treated the interaction like a transaction, which was the most respectful thing she could do. He brought her the usual bottle of sparkling water without being asked. She glanced up briefly, gave a small nod, and returned her attention to the iPad propped against the table's small vase of white orchids. Her fingers moved across the screen with the kind of focused intensity that suggested whatever she was reading wasn't going well. Darnell moved back toward the service station near the kitchen doors. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out carefully, checking that Mr. Harrison wasn't watching from the host stand. The text was from his daughter. "Dad, can you come home early tonight?" He typed back quickly. "What's wrong?" "Nothing, just miss you." Darnell felt the familiar tug in his chest. Lily was 7 now, old enough to understand that he worked nights, but young enough to still want him home for bedtime stories. He glanced at the clock above the bar. 3 hours left on his shift. "I'll be home by 11:30. Love you. Love you too." He slipped the phone back into his pocket and picked up the tray of appetizers waiting under the heat lamp. Table 7. A group of lawyers celebrating something, their laughter getting louder with each round of drinks. He delivered their calamari with the same polite smile he'd perfected, then retreated before they could pull him into their conversation. The front door opened. Darnell's attention shifted automatically. Part of the job was tracking new arrivals, anticipating who'd need menus, who'd head straight for the bar. 4 men stepped inside. They weren't dressed for Lumiere. Jeans and work jackets, one of them in a faded Carhartt coat with paint stains on the sleeves. The hostess approached them with her professional smile, but something in their body language made Darnell stop moving. They weren't looking at her. Their eyes scanned the dining room like they were searching for something specific. One of them, The tallest, with graying hair and a hard jaw, spotted Victoria Sterling's table, and his expression shifted into something sharp and cold. Darnell felt a familiar sensation crawl up his spine. It was the same alert he used to get on patrol, the instinct that separated routine calls from situations about to turn dangerous. He'd tried to bury that instinct when he left the police department 3 years ago, but apparently it hadn't gone anywhere. The 4 men moved past the hostess without waiting to be seated. They took a table near Victoria's, 4 chairs scraping loudly against the floor. Other diners glanced over with mild irritation. The men didn't open their menus. They just sat there. 3 of them facing Victoria's direction, voices low and tense. Darnell picked up a water pitcher and moved closer, using the excuse of refilling glasses at a nearby table. He kept his movements casual, but positioned himself where he could hear fragments of their conversation. "That's her," the tall one with gray hair. His voice carried an edge of barely controlled anger. "Sterling Ventures, that's the CEO. You sure?" Another man, younger, with nervous energy in his hands. "I memorized her face from the news. That's Victoria Sterling." The third man leaned forward. "So, what do we do? Just sit here?" "We let her know. We let her see what her decisions cost." Darnell's grip tightened on the water pitcher. He looked at Victoria. She was still focused on her screen, completely unaware. The soft lighting made her look almost fragile despite the severity of her expression, like someone who'd learned to armor themselves against a world that kept hitting back. He needed to think. These men weren't here for dinner. Their energy was all wrong, the kind of collective tension that preceded violence. But what could he do? Call Mr. Harrison? Get them kicked out based on a feeling? They hadn't done anything yet, except Darnell had seen this before. The stillness before the storm. The way angry men gathered courage from each other until someone made the first move. And then the tall one, the leader, looked directly at Darnell. Their eyes met for 2 seconds. Something flickered across the man's face. Recognition. Darnell's heart rate climbed. He looked away and moved back toward the kitchen, mind racing. He remembered them now. A bar fight at a place called Rosie's on the south side 5 years ago. Darnell had been first on scene as a patrol officer, broke it up before anyone got seriously hurt. They'd all been arrested, spent a night in jail, paid fines. Nothing major. But the tall one, Victor, that was his name, had looked at Darnell during booking and said something. "I don't forget faces, Officer Brooks." Darnell forced himself to breathe normally. Maybe Victor didn't recognize him. Different hair, the beard, 30 lb heavier. But even if Victor did remember, this wasn't about Darnell. This was about Victoria Sterling. One of the 4 men stood up, the younger one, nervous energy barely contained. He walked toward Victoria's table. Darnell's body moved before his mind caught up. He cut across the dining room, intercepting the man 3 steps before he reached Victoria. "Sir, can I help you with something?" Darnell kept his voice light, professional, but positioned himself directly in the man's path. The man stopped. Up close, Darnell could see the desperation in his eyes, the kind that came from too many sleepless nights. "I need to talk to her. If you'd like to speak with another guest, I can pass along a message." Darnell didn't move aside. "Just get out of my way." Victoria looked up from her iPad, finally noticing the confrontation. Her expression shifted from confusion to something more guarded. Victor stood up from his table. The other 2 followed. Darnell felt the situation crystallizing into something he couldn't walk away from. 4 against 1. A room full of civilians. A woman who had no idea she was in danger. All his training said to de-escalate, create distance, but there was no backup here. Just him. A water pitcher still in his hand, and 3 years of rust on skills he'd tried to forget. Victor walked over, and now Darnell could see the recognition settling fully into place on the man's face. "Wait, I know you." Darnell met his eyes. There was no point in lying. You should go back to your table. You're that cop, Brooks. Darnell Brooks. Victor's voice rose slightly. You arrested us. Rosie's bar 5 years ago. The other men looked at Darnell with new attention. The young one stepped back slightly, suddenly uncertain. But Victor moved closer. Small world, Victor said. His tone carried something between surprise and bitterness. You're a waiter now. What happened? They fire you? Darnell didn't respond. He could feel Victoria's eyes on him, calculating, trying to understand what was happening. I asked you a question. Victor's voice hardened. I left the force. Darnell kept his tone neutral. Now I'm asking you to sit down or leave the restaurant. You're disturbing other guests. Disturbing? One of the other men laughed bitterly. That's rich. You know what's disturbing? Losing your job because some billionaire pulls their money out of your factory. 200 people unemployed. But sure, we're the problem because we're a little loud. Victoria stood up from her table. What is this about? Victor turned to face her fully. You don't even know. Do you, Sterling Ventures? You pulled your investment from Westbrook Manufacturing 8 months ago. You remember that decision? Victoria's expression remained controlled, but Darnell saw the slight tension in her shoulders. That's business. The project wasn't profitable business. Victor's voice dripped with contempt. You sit here in your $1,000 suit, eating meals that cost more than my weekly unemployment check, and you call it business? The young man found his courage again. My wife left me because I couldn't pay the mortgage. You want to call that business too? Darnell raised his hand slightly, a calming gesture. I understand you're angry, but this isn't the place. Victor looked at him with something like pity. You understand? You're taking orders from people like her now. You really think you understand? For a brief moment, Darnell wondered if Victor was right. Maybe he didn't understand. Maybe he'd taken the easy path, hiding in this job instead of facing the world that had broken him. But then, he saw Victoria's hand trembling slightly as she gripped her iPad, and he remembered why he'd walked away from police work in the first place. He was tired of watching people get hurt. Darnell's voice dropped lower, stripped of the polite server tone. It came out with the authority he'd carried for 8 years in uniform. If you want to talk, we can do this the right way, but you need to step back from her table now. The word hung in the air between them. Something in Darnell's posture had shifted without him meaning it, to shoulders squared, weight centered, hands relaxed but ready. The muscle memory of a man who knew how to handle conflict. Victor studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. All right, Brooks, let's talk. Darnell gestured toward the rear of the restaurant. There's a patio out back. We can talk there without disturbing anyone. The dining room had gone quiet. Other guests watched with the careful stillness of people trying not to get involved. Victoria remained standing by her table, her expression unreadable. Darnell caught the eye of Sarah, another server working the floor. He tilted his head slightly toward the kitchen, their silent signal for trouble. She gave a barely perceptible nod and moved toward the back to alert the manager. The patio was technically a service area. A concrete square enclosed by brick walls where staff came to catch their breath between rushes. A few metal chairs sat scattered around a table someone had dragged out months ago. String lights hung overhead, half of them burnt out. The cool night air carried the smell of grease from the kitchen vents. Darnell held the door open as the 4 men filed out. The young one kept glancing back at the dining room like he was already regretting this. The other 2, one built like a linebacker, the other lean with weathered hands, moved with the weary caution of men who'd learned to expect trouble. Victor was the last to step outside. He stopped in front of Darnell. You really want to help us? Or are you just protecting your rich customers? Darnell met his gaze. I want to stop this from getting worse. Too late for that. It's already worse. Has been for 8 months. The door closed behind them, muffling the restaurant noise. Out here, the city sounds took over distant traffic. A siren several blocks away, the hum of air conditioning units. Darnell pulled out one of the metal chairs. "Sit if you want. I can get coffee, water, whatever you need." "We don't need coffee." Victor stayed standing, arms crossed. "We need that woman in there to understand what she did." The nervous young man finally spoke up. "I'm Tommy Davis. I worked at Westbrook Manufacturing for 12 years. I was a welder. They put me on the specialty pieces, the custom orders that needed precision. I was proud of that work." Darnell could see the exhaustion carved into Tommy's face, the kind that came from months of unemployment and shame. The linebacker sat down heavily. "Mike Johnson. I fixed the machines when they broke. 20 years in that factory." The lean man with weathered hands remained standing. "Ray Sullivan. I ran the third shift. 52 people under my supervision." Darnell absorbed this information. These weren't career criminals. They were working men who'd been hollowed out by circumstance. Victor pointed at Darnell. "And you? You remember arresting us?" "I remember. You were professional about it. Didn't rough us up. Didn't talk down to us. That's the only reason we're out here talking instead of causing a real scene." Victor's expression darkened. "But don't think that means we trust you. You're still working for people like her." Ray spoke quietly. "If we're sitting out here, we deserve to know who we're talking to. What happened to you? Why'd you leave the force?" Darnell looked at the four of them. Part of him wanted to deflect, to keep his past buried, but another part was tired of hiding. "I was with the Community Intervention Unit," he said. "We handled situations where someone needed to de-escalate before violence happened. I thought I was good at it." He met their eyes. "Then I got called to a domestic dispute. Husband had been drinking. Wife was scared. I talked to him, thought I'd calmed him down. So I left." The night air felt colder. Darnell could see it all again. The small house. The woman's eyes asking him not to go. His own confidence that he'd handled it. 2 hours later, she was in the hospital with 3 broken ribs and a fractured jaw. He'd waited until I left. Darnell's hands were flat on the table. I couldn't trust my judgment after that, so I turned in my badge. The silence that followed felt like understanding. Victor finally sat down. "So, you get it? What it's like to lose the thing you were good at." "I get it." Tommy leaned forward. "My wife left me 3 months ago, took our son. Every morning I'd get up, put on work clothes, pretend I was going to a job. I'd drive to the library and fill out applications for 8 hours. Then I'd come home like I'd been at work." Mike shook his head. "My daughter had to drop out of college. She works at Target now. She tells me it's fine, but I see how she looks at me like I broke a promise." Ray's weathered hands were clasped together. "When Westbrook shut down, the 52 people on my shift asked me what to do next. They trusted me to have answers." He looked at Darnell. "I didn't have any." Darnell felt the weight of their stories. This was what Victoria Sterling couldn't see from her corner table, the human cost of business decisions. These men had built their identities around work that no longer existed. "I understand why you're angry," Darnell said. "But going after Victoria Sterling won't fix anything." Victor's jaw tightened. "So, we're supposed to just accept it?" "No, but there's a difference between making her listen and making her a target. You came here ready to intimidate her. That won't help." Tommy stood up. "We didn't threaten anyone. We just wanted her to see us." "You wanted more than that," Darnell said quietly. "And I get that impulse. But it won't help." The door from the restaurant opened. Victoria Sterling stepped out onto the patio. Darnell stood immediately. "Miss Sterling, you should go back inside." She ignored him, her attention fixed on the 4 men. "I overheard part of your conversation. Westbrook Manufacturing. I remember that decision." Victor stood slowly. The other 3 did the same. Victoria's voice remained steady. "We pulled our investment because the factory was losing money. That's business reality." "Business reality." Tommy's voice cracked. "You keep using that phrase like it absolves you. I'm stating facts. Mike took a step forward. Here's a fact. 200 people lost their jobs, not because they weren't working hard enough, because you decided the numbers didn't look good enough. Victoria's expression remained composed, but Darnell could see tension in her shoulders. She wasn't used to being confronted like this. "Did you ever come to the factory?" Ray asked quietly. "Before you pulled out, did you ever meet the people working there? That's not how investment works. We reviewed data projections." "So, no," Ray interrupted. "You never met us. We were just data to you." Something flickered across Victoria's face. Maybe the first crack in her armor. If I visited every investment property, I'd never have time to run my company. But that's the point. Victor said, "You run a company. We had lives, and you treated our lives like they were disposable." Darnell moved between them. "Miss Sterling, why did you come out here?" She looked at him, and for the first time since he'd started serving her, he saw uncertainty in her eyes. "Because the waiter who served me water for a year just revealed he used to be a police officer," she said. "Because 4 men showed up claiming my decisions destroyed their lives. Because nothing about tonight makes sense." "What makes sense?" Victor said. "Is that you're finally seeing the consequences of your choices?" Victoria turned to face him. "And what were you planning to do before this man stopped you?" The question hung in the air. Victor opened his mouth, then closed it. "We just wanted to talk," Tommy finally said. "You wanted to intimidate me," Victoria corrected. 4 men approaching a woman dining alone. You knew exactly what that would feel like. Victor's expression hardened. "Good. You should know what it's like to have your security taken away." Darnell moved between them again. "That's enough, Victor. You said you wanted to talk, so talk. Tell her what you need, what I need." Victor's voice rose. "I need my job back. I need to be able to look my wife in the eye. I need to not wake up at 3 hours in the morning wondering how I'm going to pay the mortgage. I need to get my daughter back in college," Mike added. Tommy's voice was barely above a whisper. "I need to stop pretending." Ray said nothing, but the pain in his eyes spoke volumes. Victoria stood very still, processing this. Then something in her expression shifted. Not much, but enough for Darnell to notice. A softening around the eyes, a slight drop in her shoulders. "I didn't know," she said finally. Victor laughed bitterly. "That's supposed to make it better." "No, it's supposed to be the truth." Victoria's composure cracked slightly. "I sit in meetings and review spreadsheets and make decisions that seem logical on paper. I don't think about the people behind the numbers because if I did, I'd never be able to make hard choices. That's what I tell myself." Anyway, she looked at Darnell. "You asked why I came out here. I spend most of my time around people who either want something from me or are afraid of me. It's lonely, and when you stepped between me and these men, you weren't doing it for money or because I'm your boss. You did it because you thought it was right. I haven't seen that in a long time." The words seemed to surprise her as much as they surprised everyone else. Before anyone could respond, the patio door opened. Mr. Harrison stepped out, his expression tight with concern. He was in his 50s, impeccably dressed, radiating the authority of someone who ran an establishment where mistakes weren't tolerated. "Darnell, what's going on here?" His eyes took in the scene. The 4 men. Victoria, the tension. Darnell felt his stomach drop. This was the moment where he'd get fired. "There was a situation," Darnell said carefully. "I brought it out here to handle it quietly." "Miss Sterling, are you all right? Should I call the police?" The word police made all 4 men tense. Even Victor's bravado faltered. Victoria looked at the 4 men, then at Darnell. When she spoke, her voice carried authority. "No police. These men and I are having a conversation. Darnell was helping facilitate it." Mr. Harrison blinked. "Miss Sterling, I really think," I said. "No police." Her CEO voice had returned. "That's all." Mr. Harrison looked at Darnell. "You're supposed to be working the floor. We have customers waiting. Darnell stays. Victoria said, "We're not finished." Mr. Harrison's expression suggested this entire situation was giving him a migraine. "With all due respect, this is highly irregular, which I'm sure can be covered by your other staff for a few more minutes," Victoria said firmly. Mr. Harrison gave them all one more disapproving look before retreating. The door clicked shut. Darnell knew they had maybe 10 minutes before the manager returned. "We need to resolve this now," he said, looking at Victor and his companions. "You came here angry. You had every right to be. But now you need to decide what you actually want. Revenge or a way forward." Then he turned to Victoria. "And you need to decide if you're willing to see these men as people instead of problems." The string lights overhead cast uneven shadows. Somewhere in the distance, a siren faded away. Victoria broke the silence. "I can't give you your jobs back. Westbrook Manufacturing is closed. That decision is final." Victor's expression darkened, but she held up a hand. "But Sterling Ventures runs a workforce development program. We train people for new industries, help them transition to growing sectors. If you're willing to retrain, I can get you into the program. It covers tuition and provides a stipend during training." Tommy looked skeptical. "What kind of training?" "Renewable energy installation, advanced manufacturing, logistics management. Depends on your background and what's available." "Why would you do that?" Mike asked. Victoria met his eyes. "Because tonight someone reminded me that behind every business decision are human beings, and because making this offer cost me less than living with the knowledge that I could have helped and chose not to." Ray spoke quietly. "The 52 people from my shift. Can they join too?" "Yes." Victor still looked skeptical, arms crossed, but Darnell could see something shifting in his expression. Not trust exactly, but maybe the beginning of hope fighting against bitterness. "And what do you get out of this?" Victor asked. Victoria smiled without warmth. "I get to sleep at night. That's worth something." The four men exchanged looks. Darnell stayed quiet, letting them process. Finally, Tommy nodded. "Okay, I'll try it." Mike followed. "Me too," Ray simply said. "Yes." All eyes turned to Victor. He stood silent for a long moment, jaw tight. Then his shoulders dropped slightly. "Fine, but I want it in writing. You'll have a formal offer by Monday," Victoria said. The tension that had filled the patio finally began to ease. It wasn't perfect resolution. Too much damage had been done for that. But it was something. A fragile agreement built on exhaustion and slim hope. Victor stepped toward Darnell and extended his hand. "You're all right, Brooks." Darnell shook his hand. "I need to get back inside before my boss fires me." The four men headed toward the exit. As they filed out, Tommy stopped and looked back at Victoria. "Thank you," he said. "I know you didn't have to do this." Victoria nodded once. Then they were gone. Darnell and Victoria stood alone in the patio. The sound of the restaurant filtered through the door, dishes clattering muted conversation. The normal rhythm of a night that had been anything but normal. "You could have called the police," Victoria said. "Why didn't you?" "Because I've seen what happens when you treat desperate people like criminals. It doesn't fix anything. That's why you left the force." "I left because I stopped trusting myself." Victoria studied him with open curiosity. "But tonight, you trusted yourself. You stepped in, talked them down. Those are the actions of someone who knows what they're doing, or someone who got lucky. I don't think luck had much to do with it." She picked up her phone. "Darnell Brooks, that's your name?" "Yes." "The waiter who's actually a crisis negotiator. Former crisis negotiator. Current waiter who's about to lose even that job. I'll talk to Mr. Harrison. Make sure he understands what happened. You don't need to do that." "I know, but I'm going to anyway." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "You said you failed. That woman who got hurt. You think that makes you a failure?" Darnell didn't answer right away. "I think it means I wasn't as good as I thought I was," he said finally. "Or maybe it means you were human. Maybe the real failure would have been stopping trying altogether." She opened the door. "Thank you for tonight, for showing me something I'd forgotten." "What's that?" "That it's possible to care about people you don't know." She went back inside. Darnell stood alone for a moment, letting the adrenaline drain. His hands were steady now, his breathing even. For 3 years, he'd been hiding. Tonight, all of that had come rushing back, and for the first time since he'd turned in his badge, he didn't feel like a failure. He felt like himself. Darnell checked the time. 9:45. He texted Lily, "I'll be home soon. Had an interesting night. Love you." Then he went back inside to face whatever consequences waited. But when he stepped through the door, he found Victoria standing near the host stand, speaking with Mr. Harrison in low tones. The manager's expression had shifted from anger to something closer to understanding. Victoria caught Darnell's eye and gave a small nod before collecting her coat. She paused at the door and looked back at him one more time. There was something different in her expression now, not quite warmth, but maybe the beginning of it. Then she was gone into the night. Mr. Harrison approached Darnell. "My office now." In the cramped office that smelled like old paperwork and espresso, Mr. Harrison gestured to the chair. Darnell sat. Miss Sterling explained the situation. The manager said, "4 men came here to confront her. You moved them outside to prevent a scene. Is that accurate?" "Yes, sir." Mr. Harrison pulled off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "I should fire you. Walking away from your tables, taking aggressive men to our patio. Any of those things would normally be grounds for termination." Darnell nodded, accepting it. "But I'm not going to." Mr. Harrison put his glasses back on. "Miss Sterling said you potentially prevented a violent situation. She also said if I fired you, she'd stop coming here and she's one of our best customers." The words landed uncomfortably. Darnell didn't want to keep his job because of economic leverage. "I appreciate that," Darnell said carefully. "But if you need to let me go, I understand. I've been running restaurants for 30 years. I know the difference between someone causing problems and someone solving them." Mr. Harrison leaned forward. "Miss Sterling mentioned you used to be a police officer, community intervention unit, and you left that to wait tables." Darnell had given Victor the truth earlier. He owed his boss at least some version of it. "I made a mistake on the job. Someone got hurt because I didn't act fast enough. I couldn't trust my judgment after that. But tonight you trusted it. Tonight I didn't have a choice. We always have choices. You chose to get involved." The manager stood up. "Get back on the floor. We still have an hour left." And Darnell, "Next time. And I hope there is no next time you come get me first." "Understood." "Understood." Darnell left feeling oddly lighter. He cleared Victoria's table, noting her half-finished meal and generous tip left in cash. The rest of the shift passed in familiar rhythm, wiping tables, refilling salt shakers, counting tips while Sarah complained about a table that had stayed too long. By 11:15, his feet ached, but his mind felt clearer than it had in months. Walking to his car through the parking garage, Darnell checked his phone. A photo from Lily, a stick figure drawing with "I love you, Dad" written in crayon, and another text from an unknown number. "This is Victoria Sterling. Mr. Harrison gave me your contact. I'd like to speak with you when you have time. No pressure, but I have a proposition that might interest you." Darnell stared at the message. Part of him wanted to ignore it, keep his life simple, but another part was curious. He texted back, "I'm free tomorrow afternoon if that works." The response came immediately. "To Sac. I'll send you the address." Darnell drove home through empty streets, his mind still replaying the night's events. When he unlocked his apartment door, Mrs. Robinson from across the hall was asleep on his couch with a cooking show playing softly on the television. She was in her 60s, a retired teacher who'd been watching Lily for 3 years, ever since Darnell's mother passed and left him without family nearby. She'd become like a grandmother to Lily, the kind of village it took to raise a child when you were doing it alone. Darnell gently touched her shoulder. She woke immediately, alert despite the late hour. "How was Lily?" Darnell asked. "Perfect, as always. She did her homework. We had dinner. She was in bed by 8:30. Mrs. Robinson gathered her things. How was your night?" Darnell thought about the question. Complicated? But okay. Complicated can be good sometimes. Means things are changing. After she left, Darnell looked in on Lily. She was asleep in her small bedroom, surrounded by stuffed animals and books. Her dark, curly hair, so much like her mother's had been, spread across the pillow. One hand curled near her face. She looked peaceful in a way that made his chest ache. He pulled the blanket up slightly and kissed her forehead. She stirred but didn't wake. In his own room, Darnell sat on the edge of his bed. For 3 years, he'd convinced himself that stepping back was the right choice, that avoiding situations where his judgment mattered was safer for everyone. But tonight had reminded him of something he'd forgotten. Sometimes doing nothing was more dangerous than doing something. He lay down, but sleep didn't come easily. His mind kept returning to Victoria's text. What kind of proposition would a CEO have for a waiter? The next morning, Darnell made pancakes while Lily told him about the drawing she'd made, a family of 3 with a son and a house and flowers everywhere. She didn't mention that the family only had 2 people in real life, just her and him. She always drew 3. "Can we go to the park?" Lily asked after lunch. "I have a meeting first, a meeting on Saturday. Someone wants to talk to me about something. It won't take long." They spent the morning together, easy and comfortable, but as 1:30 approached, Darnell felt his anxiety building. He left Lily with Mrs. Robinson and drove downtown. The address Victoria sent led to an office building, glass and steel, rising 20 floors. Sterling Ventures occupied the entire 15th floor. Darnell gave his name to the receptionist and was directed to wait in a sitting area with leather chairs and abstract art that probably cost more than his car. He was the only black face in the lobby, something he'd stopped noticing years ago but never quite stopped feeling. Victoria appeared 10 minutes later, dressed more casually than at the restaurant but still projecting authority. Dark jeans, a gray sweater, hair down around her shoulders. She looked younger this way, less like a CEO and more like a person. "Thank you for coming," she said, shaking his hand. "My office is this way." He followed her through a maze of cubicles and glass-walled conference rooms. Her office sat in the corner with windows overlooking the city. The desk was clean except for a laptop and a single photo frame. Darnell could just make out what looked like a family photo, though he couldn't see the details. Victoria gestured to a chair across from her desk, but then moved to sit beside him rather than behind it, creating equality rather than hierarchy. "I've been thinking about last night," Victoria said, "about how you handled that situation. How you saw 4 angry men and didn't just see a threat. You saw people who were hurting. That's what I was trained to do. Most people don't have that training, and even fewer would choose to use it for minimum wage." She leaned forward slightly. "I want to offer you a job." Darnell had expected this, but hearing it still felt surreal. "I have a job. You have a job that underutilizes your abilities. I'm offering you a position as Community Relations Manager for Sterling Ventures. Your role would be to interface between our investments and the communities they affect, to be the person who sees the human impact of our business decisions before those decisions get made." Darnell felt his pulse quicken. "I'm not qualified for that. I don't have a business degree. I don't know anything about corporate structure. You're qualified because you know how to listen. You know how to de-escalate. You know how to see people instead of problems." Victoria pulled out a folder from her desk drawer. "This is the position, description, and compensation package. Take it home. Think about it. No pressure." Darnell opened the folder. The salary made his stomach drop. It was more than triple what he made at the restaurant. Enough to move to a better apartment, to save for Lily's college, to stop worrying about every unexpected expense. But the number also terrified him. This wasn't just a job change. This was stepping back into a world where his decisions mattered, where he could fail again. "Why me?" he asked. "You could hire someone with actual experience. Because last night, when 4 men showed up ready to cause harm, you didn't call security or hide. You stepped forward and talked to them like human beings. That's not something you can teach. That's character." Darnell closed the folder, his mind racing. "Can I ask you something? Last night on the patio when you offered those men the training program, was that something you'd been planning or did you make that up?" Victoria smiled slightly. "Both. The program exists. We've had it for 2 years, but I'd never once thought about offering it to the people from Westbrook Manufacturing until that moment. You made me see them differently. And that's what you want me to do? Make you see people differently? I want you to make sure we don't create more people like Victor Hayes and Tommy Davis, people who feel invisible and desperate because we couldn't be bothered to consider them." It was compelling. More than compelling. It was everything Darnell had thought he'd lost when he left the police force. A chance to help people, to use his skills for something meaningful. But what if he failed again? What if his judgment was still broken? Victoria seemed to read his hesitation. "I know you're scared. Last night you told those men about the woman who got hurt. That failure has been defining you. It should define me. I made a mistake with real consequences. And you learned from it. That makes you exactly the kind of person I need. Someone who understands that decisions have weight." She stood up. "Take the weekend. Think about it. Call me Monday with your answer." Darnell stood as well, folder in hand. "What if I say no? Then I'll respect your decision and keep coming to Lumiere twice a week." Walking back through the office, Darnell noticed people working even on Saturday afternoon, young professionals building careers in a world he deliberately stayed away from. In the elevator down, he looked at the folder again. The job description included phrases like stakeholder engagement and community liaison, corporate language that felt foreign, but underneath it was really asking him to do what he'd done last night. See people, listen to them, help them feel heard. Darnell drove home slowly, taking the long way through neighborhoods he used to patrol. The city looked different in daylight, less dangerous, more complicated. At home, Lily was coloring at the kitchen table. She looked up when he came in, her face brightening. "Dad, you're home early." He picked her up and spun her around. She was getting too big for it now, almost too heavy to lift. But she still giggled the same way. "I had a meeting," Darnell said, setting her down. "How's your Saturday?" "Good. Mrs. Robinson made me pancakes again." "Can we go to the park now?" "Absolutely." They spent the afternoon at the playground 3 blocks away. Darnell pushed her on the swings while she shouted, "Higher!" and laughed at the sky. Her beaded braids flew behind her as she swung, catching the afternoon light. Other parents sat on benches, scrolling through phones or chatting. Normal Saturday routines, the kind of simple happiness Darnell had fought to build. But as he watched Lily climb the jungle gym, fearless and confident, he wondered if playing it safe was really the best thing for her. What kind of lesson was he teaching by hiding from challenges, by letting one failure define everything? That evening, after Lily went to bed, Darnell sat at his kitchen table with Victoria's folder. He read through the job description carefully, then looked at the compensation package again. The salary would change everything, but more than the money, the work itself called to something he'd tried to bury. He thought about Victor and Tommy and Mike and Ray. 4 men who'd come looking for revenge and left with hope. That transformation hadn't happened because of money or programs. It had happened because someone took the time to listen. What if he could do that as a job? What if he could be the person who stood between business decisions and human consequences? Darnell thought about what Victoria had said. Maybe the real failure would have been stopping trying altogether. For 3 years, he'd let one mistake define him. He'd convinced himself that stepping back was noble, that avoiding responsibility was safe. But maybe the real failure was letting that mistake stop him from trying again. He pulled out his phone and looked at Lily's drawing from yesterday, the stick figure family of 3. She always drew 3, even though it was just the 2 of them. Maybe she knew something he'd forgotten, that families could grow, that life could expand beyond the walls you built around yourself. Darnell typed a message to Victoria. "I don't need the weekend. My answer is yes." He hit send before he could change his mind. The response came 5 minutes later. "Welcome to Sterling Ventures. We'll discuss details Monday." "And Darnell, thank you." Darnell set the phone down and looked around his small apartment. The furniture was second-hand. The walls needed painting. The refrigerator made strange noises, but it was safe. It was stable. It was the life he'd built by playing it safe. Starting Monday, that would change. He'd be walking back into a world where his decisions mattered, where his judgment would be tested, where he could fail again. But he'd also be walking towards something he'd lost 3 years ago, the feeling that his life had purpose beyond just surviving. The city lights glowed through his window. Somewhere out there, people were struggling with problems he couldn't see yet. But soon, he'd be in a position to help them, to make sure their voices were heard before they reached the point of desperation. In her bedroom, Lily stirred and called out softly. Darnell went to her, tucked the blanket around her, whispered that he was there. She settled back into sleep, trusting completely that her father would keep her safe. That trust terrified him, but it also reminded him why he couldn't keep hiding. Monday would bring new challenges, new responsibilities, new chances to fail, but it would also bring new opportunities to help people, to use the skills he'd been given for something that mattered. Darnell looked at Lily's drawing one more time. The family of 3, the sun, the house, the flowers. Maybe she'd been drawing the future, not the past. Maybe she'd been showing him what could be if he was brave enough to try. He turned off the light and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her breathe in the darkness. Tomorrow was Sunday. He'd spend it with her, savoring these last hours of the simple life he'd built. Monday, everything would change. But for now, in this quiet moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. He felt ready.